Welcome to episode 22 of the Rescued by Dragons podcast, Tales of the Brunch Club, a fantasy fiction podcast inspired by a weekly homebrew Dungeons & Dragons campaign. My name is Bethany Powers, and I invite you to picture yourself in a cozy, torchlit tavern, ale in hand, gathered around a table with other listeners, waiting to hear the next chapter in the tale of the Brunch Club. But first, a quick recap of our previous episode. On their way to do battle with a pair of hill giants, the Brunch Club destroyed an innocent log after Vorjon misheard Diesa. Inside it, they found an expensive-looking necklace with a star-shaped ruby pendant. As they progressed further, a gray giant hurled boulders at them to prevent them from getting closer. The Brunch Club retreated, then came up with a plan to lure him out with 40 pounds of smoked meat. They put their plan in action after dark. Unfortunately, the first creature it attracted was a three-headed chimera. The chimera heard Vorjon's shield scrape against the rock he was hiding behind. And now, episode 23, 3.5 heads. The three-headed chimera stared at the boulder, which barely concealed the hiding Vorjon. Its red-scaled dragon head reared back, mouth aglow with imminent fire breath. Elora shot the dragon head in the neck, causing its lethal flame to shoot harmlessly above Vorjon when it recoiled from the pain. Elora quickly shot a second arrow at the chimera and struck it once again in the dragon head's neck. All three heads turned in anger toward Elora, who ducked behind her blind. While the beast searched for the source of the arrows, Salis peeked over her hiding spot just enough to fire a salvo of magic missiles. The missiles hit the chimera's flank. Bright green blasts of magic energy exploded against it as all of the sorceress's attacks hit their target. Before the light from her blasts faded, Salis dropped to her knees. She felt her skin tingle all over. The air pressure around her seemed to increase, making it harder to breathe. Green light circled around her. Salis had this feeling before. It was in the Bitch Bog, when she lost control of her magic power. That time, the magical surge had saved Vorjon after a basilisk turned him into stone. She had no idea what the surge of untamed magical energy would do. The hair stood up on the back of Salis's neck. The hair on her head felt like it was standing as well. Then, she realized it was growing, and fast. Her joints, bones, and muscles suddenly ached. The sensation reminded her of a distant, vague memory. A feeling of horror came over Salis when she remembered why the aches in her body felt so familiar. They were growing pains. Her hair grew past her eyes in a matter of seconds, and she realized she was aging rapidly with no way to stop it. While Salis aged behind her blind, Drusilla prayed and fired a purple bolt of energy from her hands. It further wounded the chimera and caused it to glow with violet light. The Brunch Club had been in enough battles together that they recognized Drusilla's guiding bolt, which briefly made the target easier to see. The purple light also glowed brighter on the more vulnerable parts of the creature. Elora used this information to her advantage and hit the brightest glowing spots with 2 phoenix arrows shot from her longbow. Vorjon and Diesa charged the chimera. They attacked both sides of its rear flanks, staying out of reach of its 3 heads. The dragon head hung limp. It dragged on the ground as the chimera tried to move away from the paladins and the rogues' attacks. Elora stood up and took careful aim to deliver a final death strike, but she was thrown off balance when something hit her. A winged lizard, about the size and shape of a large chicken, struck her shoulder as it flew past. Another flying lizard swooped past her head, then another, then 4 more landed near the pile of jerky. They began fighting each other over the free meal. In their frenzy, they began striking Diesa and Vorjon as well. Diesa grabbed one of the lizards by the tail and swung it at the other lizards that were biting and clawing at her. She knocked one of them out of the sky, and when it landed on the ground, she used the lizard in her hand to beat it to death. Drusilla conjured her cloud of spiritual ravens. It swirled around her in a 15-foot wide cloud as she ran to Diesa. The multitude of spectral ravens which formed the cloud began ripping at the lizards and the chimera with their tiny beaks and talons. They did not touch Vorjon, Diesa, or Drusilla. Behind her blind, Salis breathed a sigh of relief. Her hair stopped growing after about 4 feet. It was almost touching the ground when she stood up, but she was able to flip it behind her shoulders and get it out of the way. She saw the strange flying lizards attacking Diesa and shot green bolts of lightning from her fingertips. The lightning struck one lizard, arced to the lizard behind it, arced to the lizard behind that one, and then arced to one more. All 4 lizards dropped dead instantly, smoking on the snowy ground. Vorjon noticed the chimera was in agony. Blood seeped from several wounds on its body, and both the dragon and goat heads were lifeless, dragging harmlessly in the snow. The paladin felt pity for the fearsome, majestic beast. He said a prayer. Eclipse glowed with divine silver light. He brought the 2-headed mace down upon the chimera's lion head. When he struck it, Eclipse released an explosion of divine energy into the beast, which put it out of its misery. Before the chimera hit the ground, loud shrieks filled the air above them. 3 griffins dove at them from the sky. The eagle-headed winged lions swooped in, then pulled up at the last second so they could break their targets with sharp front talons. The 2 that dove at Diesa and Drusilla were driven back by the relentless, swarming attacks of Drusilla's clouds of spiritual ravens. The 3rd one struck Salis. Its sharp claws easily tore through her robes and ripped deep gouges in her back. The gnome's long hair got tangled around the griffin's leg. It dragged her out of the blind as it charged toward the freshly killed chimera. The griffin managed to get untangled from Salis by kicking her repeatedly with its rear lion's legs. Drusilla ran to Salis's prone, bloodied body. She was surprised to see 4-foot-long hair protruding from her scalp, but concentrated on the prayer of healing. Salis thanked her and stood up. She raised her hands toward the griffin that had bits of hair wrapped around its leg. The familiar surging feeling came over her once again as the magic missiles left her hands. "Not again," she moaned. "What?" Drusilla asked, as she noticed the green energy circling her gnome friend. "Another magic surge," Salis shouted. "Second one tonight." The only thing more unlikely than having 2 magic surges so closely together was having the same effect twice in a row, which is what happened when Salis's hair grew another 4 feet. The flying lizards were all dead. Vorjon kept the first griffin, focused on him, while Diesa and Drusilla closed in on the second. Diesa chopped at it with her axe, while Drusilla thrust her sword into it. Her cloud of spiritual ravens helped kill it quickly. Elora fired 2 quick arrows at the beast engaged with Vorjon, dispatching that one as well. Salis used her dagger to cut the 8 feet of hair down to a manageable 2. The 3rd and last remaining griffin charged at her, and she swiped at it with her dagger. It backed off a little and circled around her, waiting for its friends to come to its aid. When it realized the other 2 griffins were dead, it leapt off the ground with its powerful rear legs and flew away into the darkness. They caught their breath as they watched it fly away. "Well, that was the worst plan ever," said Elora. The Brunch Club agreed and retreated back to the site where they made camp earlier that day. They healed their wounds and went to sleep, hoping a good night's rest would help them come up with a better plan in the morning. Nothing disturbed them that night, and they woke up to a cold, misty day. This was good news, as it would make it harder for the hill giants to see them coming. They sat around a small fire and ate breakfast. "Your hair's a mess," Drusilla said to Salis. "I know. The middle of a battle is not the best time to give yourself a haircut," said Salis. "Here, let me clean it up for you," the cleric said, holding her hand out for Salis's dagger. While Drusilla tried to clean up Salis's hasty haircut, Diesa asked, "Where'd all the hair come from?" They explained to Diesa the unpredictable side effects of their sorceress's wild magic. "It saved my life once," said Vorjon, happily. "Well, judging by the length of my hair, I think I aged 16 years last night," Salis remarked as she picked up some of the long clippings that lay at her feet. Gnomes typically lived well past the age of 350, so this was not particularly devastating news to Salis. "Do I look wiser in my old age?" she asked, with a grin and a humorous twinkle in her eyes. "So, what do we do about the giants?" Diesa asked between bites of her breakfast. "I don't think that was a hill giant," said Salis. "Why not?" Drusilla asked, as she finished trimming the gnome's fiery hair. "It seemed smart, like it just wanted to be left alone," answered Salis. "Remember the hill giant we fought outside Wheaton? It was kind of dumb and aggressive." "Hill giants don't have gray skin either," said Elora. "And there only seemed to be one, not two," added Vorjon. Elora took out the map Pernold gave her and studied it. "According to this map," the ranger said, "it gets a bit hillier northeast. I say we give the giant a wide berth and head up that way." "So say we all," agreed Drusilla, speaking accurately for the rest of the brunch club. Before they packed up camp and headed to the northeast hills, Salis held Vorjon's shield up in front of her. With its tip touching the ground, it was almost as tall as she was. The emblem of Bahamut that took up most of the front of the paladin's shield was impeccably polished. Salis inspected Drusilla's handiwork in the reflection. "Not bad," said the gnome. After an hour of marching in the morning mist, the women's hair was soaked and matted to their faces. Rivulets of water rolled down Vorjon's scales. The anticipation of battle kept them from feeling cold. They reached the hills and walked carefully through the vales, keeping their eyes peeled on the hilltops. They began seeing trampled grass and bones covered in snow. When they came across a fresh animal carcass, they stopped. Through the mist, around 100 feet away, they saw a large hill in front of a larger ridge with what looked like the opening of a cave. From their position, they couldn't see the top of the hill. "Can Pip have a closer look at that ridge?" Elora asked Salis. "No fucking way," said Pip, though only Salis could hear him. "He'd be happy to," the sorceress told them. Pip begrudgingly flew through the mist in the direction of the ridge. "There's 2 giants up there," he told Salis when he returned. "They smell terrible." Elora asked the owl to describe the ridge above the cave. Salis told her Pip's observations. "If we can sneak up the ridge and get above them, that would give us advantage," said Vorjon. The brunch club agreed. Using Pip's description, Elora led them to the edge of the ridge from the back. They got within 80 feet where they could peer down and see the 2 hill giants. They sat on a wide fallen tree trunk, ripping raw meat off bones with their teeth. The carcass of a large, legless bear lay in front of them. "Well, no time like the present," said Salis. "Take the big one out first," Vorjon reminded them. The party stood. Elora, Salis, and Diesa silently prepared to attack. While Drusilla shifted her foot to get in her own attack stance, a small rock dislodged from the ground. It skipped and rolled down the hill, hit the ridge, and landed right at the giant's feet. They looked up the ridge, and they saw the 5 figures staring down at them. Instead of ducking out of the line of fire, the giants stood up, making themselves nice, big, inviting targets. "Wow, they're dumb, aren't they?" Diesa said as she let her arrow fly from her short bow at the larger of the giants. Elora, Drusilla, and Salis unleashed their attacks as well. The giant staggered back, fell to one knee, and struggled to breathe. The slightly smaller of the 2 giants howled with rage, picked up a bear carcass with one hand, and hurled it right over the ridge. It struck Elora square in the chest, knocking her backwards onto the ground, and landed on top of her. Vorjon ran over to their fallen ranger. Blood sprayed from her mouth as she coughed and tried to breathe. The paladin rolled the bear off of Elora. He bent over and touched her shoulder, and his healing energy flowed through her. The wounded giant tried to stand. Salis, Drusilla, and Diesa all fired again, all shots striking true. The giant dropped to his knees once more and fell onto his side as life left his body. The remaining giant picked up the tree trunk and hurled it toward the women that killed his friend. Vorjon dove in front of it. The trunk hit his shield and drove his arm into his abdomen, knocking the wind out of him. The sorceress, cleric, and the rogue took their shots. They all hit the giant, but its rage helped it ignore the pain. It picked up a nearby rock with both hands and held it over its head, getting ready to hurl. Elora finally caught her breath. She got to one knee, taking partial cover behind the bear. In rapid succession, she fired one phoenix arrow into the middle of the giant's forehead. The impact of the arrow created large holes in the front and back of the cranium as it entered and exited. Before Vorjon could shout, "We need the head!" Elora's second shot did even more damage to the giant's skull. The giant stood motionless for a moment. Its eyes grew unfocused as its mouth hung slack. Drool poured off its lower lip. The boulder slipped from the giant's hands, falling straight down. The large stone crushed the giant's head like an egg, collapsing it all the way down to the neck. Vorjon gave Elora an annoyed look. "Sorry," said the ranger. When they got down to the bodies, the paladin's fear was confirmed. The head of the giant had been obliterated, which they needed to prove their bounty. They were able to salvage a few teeth and some scalp, but nothing that would definitively prove they had killed both of the hill giants. "What now?" asked Yeza. "Well, I guess we can collect at least one head," said Elora. Vorjon laughed. "What's so funny?" Drusilla asked. "Well, Captain Parnold never said which head he wanted," Vorjon answered. "If you catch my meaning." Salis also laughed. "It's a good thing they're both male," she observed. They rolled the giants onto their backs. Salis used her dagger to cut away their loincloths. "Damn!" muttered Elora at the exposed giant penises. "Those are going to take a lot more than a dagger." "Congratulations, Diesa," said Vorjon, patting her jovially on the shoulder. "You're the one with the axe." Diesa sighed. "Fine," she said, and removed the intact head and 2 penises from the bodies. She placed them in the bag of colding. The brunch club reached their previous night's campsite before dark, and they spent an uneventful night in the camp. In the morning, they began the day-long walk back to Elnor with their prize. This tale will continue next week in episode 24. Episode 23 was written by Dominic White and based upon a Dungeons & Dragons campaign created by Dungeon Master Brian Messmer. Valuable contributions to the story were added with the role-playing of Bethany Powers, who plays Diesa, J.P. Black, who plays Drusilla, Liz Richard, who plays Elora, Anna Flemke, who plays Salis, Dominic White, who plays Vorjon, and Brian Messmer, who plays everyone else. Ambiance and effects used with permission by Michael Gelfi. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out by sharing it with your friends. We'd appreciate it. More information about Rescued by Dragons and ways to support this podcast can be found at rescuedbydragons.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Rescued by Dragons and on Twitter at Rescued Dragons. Thank you for listening, and please join us next week to find out, with the rest of us, what happens next to the Brunch Club. When it landed on the ground, she used the lizard in her hand. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna have to start that part over.